And I'm Richard Downie, the President and CEO of the Los Angeles World Affairs Council, and it is such a pleasure to have all of you here with us today. This is a very special day. It's for those of you, by the way, we have, this is our first test of our hybrid and in-person event. This is a test because we just got this equipment the other day. And so we wanted to sort of a soft test. So we didn't want to open it up. But as of yesterday, we decided, okay, we'll open it up yesterday at 5 o'clock. And we had over 100 people sign up since that time to this, which is a real tribute to Stephen. But just so everybody's aware.
Well, a real tribute to the traffic to get there because of the Dodgers parade.
Absolutely. So
presenting insult to me.
Yes, Stephen, who happens to be a Yankees fan from New York. For those of you who are online and are not aware of what's going on in Los Angeles, there's a huge Dodgers parade that ends right outside our building. I mean, literally right outside our building. So the streets are blocked off. Everybody had a heck of a time trying to get here, and people couldn't make it. But we are glad you are all here, and we are glad all of you online are here. And so what we'd like to do is, I'll introduce Stephen, but all of you are a very important part of this event, and your questions, not only from here in the room, but we'll also be taking questions from those of you online. So please, please fire away. I'll go for maybe 20 minutes or so with some questions of Stephen, and then we'll open it up to you guys. And anything's fair game, because you are all in for a treat. If there is anyone who can answer any question on the Middle East, it's Stephen Cook. And Stephen Cook, by the way, is the Enrico Mattei Senior Fellow for Middle Eastern and Africa Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. For those of you who don't know what that is, that's probably the premier foreign affairs institution in the United States, probably around the world. And Stephen works there. Not only is he one of the foremost experts on the Middle East in the United States, he's also a columnist for foreign policy, and he's written 4 books on the Middle East. The most recent one, which is released just this summer, is this one, The End of Ambition, America's Past, Present, and Future in the Middle East, which is a great book, by the way, for those of you that are interested. And Sean with Book Jewel is right over here if you'd like to get a copy afterwards.
He's got a Dodgers cap on.
Yeah,
He's selling my books, it's all right.
So, but he's turned it around. So, by the way, we had one of Stephen's colleagues, Max Boot, here in September, and he had a book on Reagan, which is a very, very interesting book, 800 pages. Stephen's book is about 156, which is a great book, and it's manageable. So, and not only that, but very interesting. And for those of you who really want to get a background about what's happened in the Middle East, what's going on now, and where we're going, this is the place for it. So, anyway, let me again, thanks to all of you for being here, and thanks to all of you online for being here again. We look forward to your questions. And again, this is if anything goes on with hybrid-wise, this is still a test. Please bear with us. So let me get started here and just kind of give an overview, because what's going on in the Middle East, I mean, just looking at the paper today, everything changes so quickly. It's incredible. But I mean, if you look at Israel as the focal point, we just kind of going around the region. In Gaza, for example, since the 7 October attack, the horrific Hamas attack on Israel on the 7th of October 2023, Israel has seriously degraded. Hamas fighters, probably about 15,000 deaths, and but along the way, Gaza is in shambles. They've had close to 50,000 civilian deaths, and there's just the need for aid, food for Palestinians that are in Gaza. If you look at Lebanon, which is just north of Israel, Israel in recent weeks has essentially decapitated the Hezbollah leadership. The Hezbollah is another one of these terror groups which is it's not in charge of Lebanon. It's not the government, but they have essentially more power than the government there. And for those, how many of you are familiar with the Middle East, by the way? I'm just kind of give you an overview. But okay, so we'll pace it at that level. But so in recent weeks, Israel very cleverly had some schemes. They've exploded pagers, walkie-talkies, and they've done airstrikes that have taken out much of the leadership of the Hezbollah leadership, including the longtime leader Hassan Nasrallah of the Hezbollah. And much of the airstrikes took out the leadership and much of the significant missiles that they had in Lebanon. And Israel has invaded southern Lebanon, so we can talk about that. The Houthis, another terror group in Yemen, have been firing missiles that are off the Red Sea. They've been attacking shipping in the Red Sea. They've been firing missiles at Israel. And all of these groups are supported by Iran, which is a patron of not only Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, but militias in Syria and Iraq. But they recently fired a barrage, the 1st of October, I believe, fired a barrage of about 180 ballistic missiles at Israel, which didn't have much effect through defensive. But Israel recently retaliated on Iran and pretty much took out their air defense capability, as well as a lot of their missile production capability. And what it did essentially was take off the sheen, I don't want to say making Iran look like a paper tiger, but it has taken the sheen off of this idea about the strength of military capability. So lots to, and now they're vowing to retaliate against Israel again. So we'll see where that goes. But a lot of things, dynamics around the region. Again, if I've hurt your head just describing all of this, we have, thank heaven, we have Stephen Cook here to help unpack this, and you're in a treat, because if there's anyone, as I said, that can answer questions at the basic level to the most advanced level, it's Stephen Cook, and we are just honored to have you with us. So
thank you. It's great to be here, despite the debt.
our favorite Yankee fan is Stephen Cook. Well, let me ask just one question, a few questions to start off, and then we'll open it up. But again, given the fact that we don't have a lot of Middle East experts here, we have one, but one or two we have I'm sure many in the audience. But could you help us understand a little bit about these dynamics in the region? What are the kind of key issues that we ought to focus and are for the way ahead? And say, what are those key factors that are really going to be crucial as we look at the situation ahead?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. Again, this is adding insult to injury to the parade and stuff. But I guess that's my cross to bear, as they say. As a Yankee fan this year, David, I appreciate you all being here, and I look forward to your questions, and I look forward to questions from the folks who have dialed in virtually. So, and Richard, I really appreciate the opportunity to answer the questions. But I think what's happened in the Middle East over the course of the last 14 months or so is a number of groups, I'm not really sure what the issue is here since it's so loud, and perhaps a function of the fact that there is a parade right behind us. Very, very loud.
It's here now.
That the conflict in the region between Israel and, as you pointed out, Hamas, Palestinian terrorist group, Hezbollah, Lebanese terrorist group, the Houthis, an actor in a civil war in Yemen that has taken advantage of the attacks that occurred on October 7th. And, of course, Iran, which has vowed to, one, push the United States out of the Middle East and to destroy Israel. This is the war that they've long been preparing for. And after the attacks on Israel on October 7, 2023, the Israelis declared that they would not willing to live with the situation in which it occurred as it was on October 6th, 2023, and over the course of the last 14 months now, have been working to change their security and improve their security by vowing to destroy Hamas, which attacked Israel on October 7, 2023, and killed 1,200 Israelis, most of them civilians, in gruesome and horrific ways. And this has caused a tremendous amount of damage and tremendous amount of loss of life in the Gaza Strip as a result. And then more recently, beginning in September, the Israelis have sought to push Hezbollah back from its northern border. Hezbollah had been right up on Israel's border, preparing for a war, had built tunnels under the Israeli border, and the Israelis have, as you pointed out, undertaken rather extraordinary military operations to change the situation there. And then, of course, there is a long-range conflict between Israel and Iran. What we should be looking for in the future is whether there's any diplomatic resolution to any of these conflicts. I think in the Gaza Strip, that's less likely than in Lebanon. And it is, as of yet, doesn't seem to lend itself to a diplomatic solution between Israel and Iran. So my sense is that we'll continue to see lots of violence in the Middle East for in the coming months and weeks and months, I should say.
Thanks, Stephen. Krista, could you find Imran a chair, perhaps over the corner there? Thank you. By the way, I should have mentioned, thank you, Stephen, that we have with us about 20 students from University Value Prep, which are high school students, high school. We are so glad to have you all here, and are delighted to get your questions here later on. But as you mentioned about what's going on in Gaza, let me just go a little deeper there, because Israel has now, as I mentioned earlier, Gaza is in shambles. They have killed Yahya Sinwar, who was the architect, who was head of Hamas at the time, and who was the architect of the horrific attack on Israel, the 7th of October of 23. And they've seriously degraded Hamas. They've seriously neutralized Hezbollah in the north. I mean, if there was ever a turning point, or a potential turning point for Israel to say, they just declare victory, we're going to negotiate, we want our hostages back, let's have a ceasefire, that would seem to have been the time, but it didn't happen. And instead, Israel has doubled down. They've continued major military operations in Gaza. In fact, giving large numbers of civilian casualties. They're stopping the flow of food into Gaza. I mean, what happened? Could you talk about what is that?
Yeah, I think that it's a combination of both the overall Israel's military goals, which was the destruction of Hamas. Now, a lot of people in Washington and elsewhere said that was impossible, and the Israelis said, "Oh yeah, watch us. We can accomplish this goal," and they continued to pursue that goal. There's also a political dimension here that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has a coalition government. That means, for those of you high school students who don't know, a coalition government is a government made up of a number of different political parties that agree on a number of goals. Well, within Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition, he has a number of parties who are demanding that there not be a ceasefire and that there be a continuation of the conflict until they feel satisfied that Hamas has been destroyed. Those parties, he's dependent upon those parties for his political survival. So I think that there's a confluence of two things. One, a military strategy that has laid out as its goal the destruction of Hamas, and the desire of the Prime Minister's partners within the government to continue to fight. On this question of humanitarian aid, this has been an on and off again problem throughout this conflict. It is extremely difficult to deliver humanitarian aid in the middle of a conflict zone. There are very few people on the other side of the conflict to receive that aid and distribute that aid. There is also a sense within Israel that why should they be essentially aiding the enemy, since from their perspective, much of the aid is taken and not given to the Palestinian civilians who need it most, but is absconded by Hamas. So that is the state of play. That is the mindset within Israel, and that's why the conflict in the Gaza Strip continues. Now, of course, this is not to say that the Israelis don't have a very real fight on their hands within Gaza. The remnants of Hamas have been able to continue to fight despite the killing of the leader of the organization. So that's the state of play. But the problem with the ceasefire is that none of the parties want it. Throughout the 13 months of the conflict, we have loads of evidence that the leadership of Hamas had made very, very clear through messages and other types of signaling directly to negotiators where the ceasefire was being negotiated between the United States, Qatar, Egypt, and indirectly Israel and Hamas. Hamas leaders said, we don't need a ceasefire. We're winning this conflict. And the way they said they were winning this conflict was that not only did they have military goals, and their military goals was actually to destroy Israel, which was impossible for this group to do, but one of their other principal military goals was to delegitimize Israel in the eyes of global public opinion. In that, they had succeeded extraordinarily well because of the large numbers of civilian casualties and deaths in the Gaza Strip, and we see what's happened on college campuses and in European capitals, and even on occasion in Washington, D.C. From their perspective, this is a very significant victory in the overall battle to destroy Israel. On the Israeli side, there are those who believe that the Gaza Strip should be Israeli sovereign territory, and their goal is to continue to fight until they can create the conditions where they can make that happen. So there's no interest on either part for a ceasefire, and that's why we haven't had a ceasefire. So it's very easy to say, you have a ceasefire now, but the parties actually have to agree.
Yeah. Well, you've raised actually several very interesting points I want to follow up on. But one of which is, because you talked about the internal dynamics within Israel, the party, Netanyahu, the coalition partners that support him, and within that group, there's a lot of talk about saying, look, we've degraded Hamas, we've degraded Hezbollah and Lebanon. If we've shown Iran to be a paper tiger. If there was ever a time to go after this problem at the source, Iran, it's now. I mean, this is which portends,
which they haven't done.
Which they haven't done, and it would portend to be that would be a wider regional war that could potentially draw in the United States, Russia, other countries as well. Is this something? What's your perspective? Is this something, as you said, hasn't happened yet, but is this something that could happen? What are the triggers that we would look for to see that, wow, this is something that was there?
You know, in all of these conflicts, it was not the Israelis that attacked first, right? On October 7th, the Israelis were attacked. On October 8th, the Lebanese group Hezbollah attacked Israel. The Houthis from Yemen have attacked Israel. All of these groups received money and weaponry from Iran. So the idea, from the perspective of the Israeli government, that Iran should be held accountable is one that is, I think, widely held, but that the Israelis are concerned about a regional war and what might happen. And again, when Iran fired 181 ballistic missiles at Israel, it was Iran firing at Israel. Now, this was in retaliation for the Israeli killing of the leader of Hezbollah, which is a group that is Lebanese but closely connected to the Iranian leadership, and for the killing of another Hamas leadership actually in Tehran. And so that's why they fired those missiles, and the Israelis responded and have done a lot of damage to Iran's military infrastructure. And the signals that the Israelis were sending at that time was, okay, we've demonstrated to you our military superiority. It's your move, Iran. And the Iranians are now, there's reporting in the press, both in Israel as well as here in the United States, that the Iranians are preparing yet another strike on Israel. You can understand from the perspective of the Israelis is that they have been attacked over and over again. Just like you can understand the perspective from Palestinians who have suffered so terribly as a result of this conflict. So it is clear that the Iranians would like to fight Israel to the last Palestinian and the last Lebanese. And the Israelis, there is, as I said, there's a very significant sentiment within Israel that they have to change that situation, and that the Iranians themselves have to pay a price for funding and encouraging chaos and violence throughout the region.
You know, Steve, I mean, I like to. There's so much in there I want to follow through on. But one of the, and by the way, I want to open it up to your questions. So please make sure that you have one. Are we getting any questions on? By the way, if you're online and you have a question, anytime, just go ahead and bring it up on the chat, their function or the question and answer function, and we'll bring those up. But I do want to get to, because you talked about the suffering of the Palestinian people. I mean, it's horrific. I mean, close to 50,000 casualties. Stephanie is out there trying to get in. So sorry, folks. But it's a terrible situation in Gaza. I mean, this shambles, food, starvation. We've talked to famine, medical aid, hospitals. It's been it's just a horrific situation. And you know, the United States, many people here in the United States have had the feeling that why isn't the United States doing more? We're supplying Israel with arms and other support that they need. Why aren't we reining in Israel in some fashion? President Biden came out early on and supported, said, hey, we support what Israel's doing. They got attacked. But they've tried, it appears that the Biden administration has tried to mitigate what Israel has done to mitigate suffering on the Palestinian people, but it doesn't seem to have worked. Is there anything that the United States could have done or should have done to try and rein in the Israeli attack on Palestine?
Yeah, this is a question that I get all the time, and it's a very important one. And I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One is that the Biden administration shares Israel's goals in the destruction of Hamas. There has been a lot of tension between the two governments over how that is to be accomplished, and particularly after the president ran into some political trouble in important battleground states over this policy. But overall, it strikes me that the president has not really changed his overall policy with regard to that. The other thing I think is important to understand is that, you know, given the enormity and the scale and the way in which Hamas went about its attacks on October 7th, the Israelis define their struggle in existential terms. This is a struggle for their lives. And that as important as the United States is in providing assistance to Israel under circumstances where the Israelis believe that they're fighting for their lives, that influence, that advice, that pressure that the United States might apply, on the Israeli government does not matter as much as it might under different circumstances. I have always said throughout this conflict, almost from the very beginning, that if the United States were to cut off all weapons to Israel, Israelis would scour the earth to find the bullets to kill Yahya Sinwar and the other leadership of Hamas, which planned basically a genocidal attack on Israel on October 7th.
Wow. I'm sure that's
so. The president was in a very bad situation to begin with, and then he made it worse in some ways by misinterpreting what the Israelis might do and thinking that he could have influence over how their military operations unfolded.
Thank you. I have many more questions that I want to ask you, but I really want to open it up to you guys. This is your opportunity to talk to, speaking to our high school students and other members in the audience, of course, but for our high school students, this is your opportunity to ask any question to one of the foremost experts on the Middle East in the United States. So please, if you guys have a question, do not be afraid to ask it. This is the time, and anything is fair game. We've seen on our college campuses these demonstrations. If you may have questions about that or what's going on, please feel free. Maybe even on your campus. I don't know. Chris, maybe was that? I don't know if you guys had it on yours, but you did. You did. So maybe there's. If you have a question, please, it's fair game. We open it up to all of you here in the room as well as online. We have questions already online, but please, if you wouldn't mind, we have a mic going around. Chris, let's pass the first question, Chris, and please state your name and association quickly. And so,
hi everyone, my name is Chris, or Mr. K as the students call me. Teacher from University of Brett Valley High School. Thank you all for having us. This is actually a student question. You asked me this the other day in preparation for coming to this event. I didn't have an answer to this. And I think I muttered something about, religious, there's religion or something. And they asked me, they said, there's so much land in that area, how come so many countries are fighting for one small section? And again, I think I muttered something about, there's religious associations there, but I don't have a good answer. Someone can answer that for me.
I mean, it boils down to the fact that there are two national groups, Israelis and Palestinians, who are fighting for the same piece of land. We believe that it's theirs. The Israelis see this, this is a territory from which Judaism comes from, and I'm sorry.
Indigenous.
Right.
Jews are the indigenous people.
And that, this is where the land of the Jewish forefathers and foremothers emerged and so on and so forth, and that the Jews were thrown out of this land 2,000 years ago and then are returning to their homeland. Palestinians have a very, very different narrative. This has been, this has been our land. We live here. We're the indigenous population here. Jews started coming back, really. There had always been a Jewish presence, but they had been a minority, and then Jews started coming back in the 20th century. And it's our land. And there was a war over it in 1948. The Israelis won. Palestinians were pushed out of their homes. Some left. Many were pushed out, creating a refugee crisis of 700,000 people that have only grown over many years. This leaves two pieces of land, one called the West Bank. It's called the West Bank because it's on the west bank of the Jordan River, and the Gaza Strip, which is along Egypt. That is what's been left for the Palestinian people. And so there continues to be a tremendous conflict over who are the rightful owners of this. There doesn't seem to me to be a resolution to this problem.
Stephen, if I could just follow up a little bit on that. One of the issues, particularly within Israel, and it's not everyone, but it seems to be a significantly growing portion that would like to see the Gaza be settled by Israelis, and which would mean displacing many, if not perhaps all Palestinians in that area, which would be, I would imagine, very upsetting to all of those throughout the world, certainly in the United States. But could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, look, there's a longer history here, of course. This was a plot of land after the 1940 war that established Israel's existence. The Gaza Strip was not a part of, but was occupied by the Egyptian military. And then there was a war in 1967 in which Egypt, Syria, and Jordan were about to attack Israel, and Israel struck first and prevailed in 6 days. And it came into possession of the Gaza Strip, what's called the West Bank, which was under Jordanian occupation, and sovereign territory of Syria called the Golan Heights. Over time, Israelis settled these areas. They gave up territory that they had conquered and occupied in the 1979 peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. But there was no treaties with the other countries, although in 1994 there was a peace treaty with Jordan. This still left Israel in control of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank of the Jordan River, where they had established communities, towns, even cities. In the Gaza Strip, it was a relatively small number of settlers, about 8,000 people. And in 2005, Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip. No Israelis left. The settlements were completely uprooted, and those people were sent elsewhere. The settlers at the time of the withdrawal in 2005 warned that there would be violence coming from the Gaza Strip. Then they were not wrong. Over the ensuing 18 years, there were periodic conflicts between Israel and this group, Hamas, which fired rockets into Israel. As a result, Israel, in partnership with Egypt, put on a blockade and blockaded this area of the Gaza Strip. Nothing could come in, no one could go out. There was obviously smuggling that went in and out, but officially through what had been 7 border crossings between Israel and the Gaza Strip, those were closed. The border crossings between Egypt and the Gaza Strip were closed, and there was a blockade of the Gaza Strip. Yet, there continued to be, over periods of time, rocket fire from Gaza into Israel and back. There was a conflict, smaller conflict, in 2008-2009 between Israel and Hamas, in 2012, in 2014, in 2021, and then, of course, the attacks on October 2023. Since the attacks in October 2023, the argument that those people who were withdrawn from the Gaza Strip, the argument that they made that the withdrawal from the Gaza Strip would not get Israel any security has been a strong argument given what has happened politically. More and more Israelis say, hey, they said that, we didn't agree with them at the time, but now as a result of the October 2023 attacks, we didn't have this kind of problem when we occupied the Gaza Strip. So that there is 22% of the Israeli public which thinks that resettlement of the Gaza Strip may bring Israel more security than not being in the Gaza Strip. That's a very significant number of people. It's not an official government policy to resettle the Gaza Strip. The official government policy now is for Israel to retain what they say, retain overall security control over the Gaza Strip. Which would mean that we would go back to a situation where the Israelis were on the border of the Gaza Strip, but you would also have Israeli forces located in parts of the Gaza Strip in order to what they call conduct counter-terrorist operations in order to prevent something like October 7th from happening ever again. The question, though, remains, and this is the question that no one can answer, who will rebuild Gaza? The infrastructure is completely destroyed. Homes are completely destroyed. People have been displaced. Who is going to reconstruct Gaza, and how will Gaza be politically ruled? Who is going to take responsibility for running, administering Gaza? There's been no answer to that. No Arab government has really stepped up to say that they will do it. There's been plans proposed by others. There is an allegedly somewhere out there an Emirati plan, the United Arab Emirates, an Emirati plan to do it, but basically a lot of the discussion about what to do about the Gaza Strip comes from Washington, D.C., coming up with plans and ideas that I don't think really conform with the reality of the situation. So, once again, the question is what happens to all these poor Palestinians who've been caught in the crossfire and who are left without homes, not a lot of aid, and so far no one has an answer to that.
Wow, that's grim. It just sounds really grim. Let's jump forward and get to let's use one question from the online.
Yeah, let's see if this works.
Yes.
We're asking a question from Howard from our webinar, and he said, what is Israel's military objective in Lebanon?
It's actually much more straightforward in Lebanon than it is in other places. So Hezbollah, this terror group, it essentially controls the Lebanese government, and most of its forces are in the southern part of the country, right up on Israel's border. This is in violation of a UN Security Council resolution going back to 2006, which said after a conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, that Hezbollah had to be 18 miles north of the Israeli border on the northern bank of a river called the Litani River. And that the only forces allowed in southern Lebanon, south of the Litani River, were Lebanese armed forces and UN peacekeepers. That UN Security Council resolution was never fulfilled, and in the ensuing years, Iran has helped build up Hezbollah's armed forces. And Hezbollah has engaged in all kinds of provocative actions right up on Israel's borders. Israel's northern towns are right up on the border, and you could actually see Hezbollah forces in the south. The Israelis from time to time have discovered tunnels underneath their border that were constructed by Hezbollah. And so, after the October 7th attacks, which were a terrible shock, terrible loss of life, on the next day, Hezbollah started firing rockets into Israel. In between October 2023 and September 2024, the United States and France and others sought a diplomatic solution to the problem of Hezbollah firing rockets into Israel and being so close to the Israeli border. The Israelis said, we're perfectly willing to have a diplomatic agreement, but it has to have some sort of enforcement mechanism. It can't be like UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which said that Hezbollah had to leave the area, yet there was no enforcement, and Hezbollah stayed, and not only did it stay, it got stronger with the help of the Iranians. So finally, in September, the Israelis said, well, there doesn't seem to be a diplomatic solution in the offing, and the Israelis took matters into their own hands. And one, have essentially militarily, this sounds like terrible, but militarily decapitated the leadership of Hezbollah, took out all of its military commanders, all of its leaders, and then engaged in a ground invasion of southern Lebanon to move Hezbollah out of the area and to destroy all of Hezbollah's military infrastructure. Of course, this comes with a terrible cost. Lebanese civilians are caught in the crossfire. Many have been about 1 million Lebanese, a quarter of the population. Lebanon's a very small country. About a quarter of the population has been displaced. Where Hezbollah was based in part of Beirut has been destroyed by Israeli airstrikes. And so, the goal is to push Hezbollah back beyond the Litani River. 60 to 80,000 Israelis have been evacuated from their homes starting on October 8th because they were vulnerable to Hezbollah rocket fire, as well as Hezbollah uses anti-tank munitions to fire at buildings. About 40, some significant number of Israeli buildings along that northern border have been damaged by this kind of fire. So the Israelis could not allow Hezbollah and its patron Iran to shrink sovereign Israel. That would have been a strategic victory for its enemies, and therefore we have this military operation. There is lots of discussion about an American brokered ceasefire that would resemble this UN Security Council resolution that was never fulfilled, but to Israel's demands, it would have an enforcement mechanism, and it would be patrolled by British and German forces rather than a UN peacekeeping force that has been there for a long time, which has done basically nothing in order to prevent conflict from breaking out. So that's where we stand there. That is, as opposed to what the Israelis have been trying to accomplish in Gaza, seems a much more achievable goal for them.
Wow, that's interesting. Matter of fact, the Lebanese, it seems the situation was so dire that Lebanese were displacing into Syria, which is not a great place to
Right,
to
because
want to
Syria
go
has
to.
been racked by its own civil war since 2011.
But anyway, Jim, please.
Stephen, I like your comment, and I'm thinking about this whole
history as a series of missed opportunities. I'll take you back to 1948. A nation known as Transjordan occupied the nation state of Palestine and renamed itself Jordan. At the same time, over 750,000 Jews who had lived for 4 millennia in Arab nations were forcibly expelled and they were absorbed into Israel. Conversely, the Palestinians who left Israel, who did not become citizens, were kept in segregated apartheid-like camps and became what we know today. So, to shorten it, I think your comments on this series of missed opportunities.
Look, we could talk about missed opportunities and what happened, in 1948 and what happened before 1948. You can go back, it's a series of historical point scoring that no one can actually agree on, right? Palestinians have their own narrative, historical narrative. The Israelis have their own historical narrative, and nowhere do they really meet. And so, like I said, you can articulate one or the other, but it really just ends up being point scoring, and you don't change any minds as a result. The problem is that we have a situation right now where there are 2.2 million Palestinians in the West Bank. You have the numbers close to 2 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, many who have now been displaced from their homes, and there's a search for justice for the Palestinians who believe that they are negotiating over 20% of what their homeland is. And so whether there were missed opportunities in the past or not, this is the situation that we're in right now. The unfortunate problem that we find ourselves in right now is that what we have in this political arena is the most dynamic end of the Israeli political arena is the kind of hard right. The ones who want to annex the West Bank to Israel and reestablish settlements in the Gaza Strip. And the most dynamic end of the Palestinian political spectrum is Hamas. And that puts one-staters against one-staters. There's where's the compromise there? But what I always say is, let's imagine for a second now, we don't have that situation. We have an Israeli prime minister who's interested in negotiation, and we have a Palestinian Authority president. Now, Palestinians in the West Bank, which is separated by about 50 miles of Israeli territory from the Gaza Strip, are ruled by something called the Palestinian Authority, for you high school kids who might not know this. And they have an authority. This was set up as part of, in the 1990s, as a sort of a proto-state in the making, and there was this belief that by 1999-2000 there would be a Palestinian state sitting side by side with Israel. It didn't work out for a variety of complicated reasons, and when you go to college and you want to take a class on this, you can learn all about it. Or you can read my book. And so they have a governing authority in the West Bank, although they don't govern the entire territory. There are Israeli settlements there, and so on and so forth. Let's imagine, though, for a second, that there's a president of the Palestinian Authority and an Israeli prime minister who want to negotiate. And the problem there is that Israel's minimum demands for peace are not anything that the Palestinians can satisfy. And the Palestinians' minimum demands for peace are not anything that the Israelis can satisfy. And those demands are mirror images of each other. So the Palestinians say, for example, we need to have our capital in Jerusalem. And the Israelis say, well, Jerusalem is the undivided historic capital of the Jewish people. Sorry, you can have a capital, but it can't be in Jerusalem. The Palestinians say, we need a contiguous Palestinian state. And the Israelis say, well, we're not going back to what's known as the June 1967 armistice lines, which is very different from the territory that the Israelis now control. And the Israelis feel quite vulnerable because at Israel's narrowest point, at those June 1967 lines, it's like 9 miles, right? So they say, we're not doing that. And then the Palestinians say, we also need to have at least a token number of people who were made refugees as a result of the establishment of the Palestinian state come back into Israel. And Israel say, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. Now, there is, some idea that the Palestinians, for political reasons, they have to say that there is some other arrangement. But that's the rub, is that no Palestinian leader can agree to some sort of agreement without some provision for that. Now, the United States has been 25, 30 years trying to change those interests and incentives and constraints, and was never able to do it. So, under those circumstances, my fear is that this is a conflict that defies resolution, which is a very un-American way of thinking about things, because we always think that we can have a solution to a problem, but it may not be. And particularly under present circumstances, after October 2023, when even Israelis who were once committed to this idea have reassessed their view, and I imagine that there are many Palestinians who have suffered so much at the hands of the Israeli military as a result of this conflict, who once were willing to, accept this arrangement, are less inclined these days to do that. It's tragic.
Wow. We have a question right here. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Iris, and I'm a
Your name is Iris?
Yeah.
That's my mom's name. It's a lovely name.
Thank you. I'm a senior at uni prep, but my question's kind of like it's multiple questions combined into one.
You're ready for Washington.
But the one question is, do you believe that labeling this as a conflict downplays the significance of the situation, or is it right-fitting? And is it possible that this could turn into a World War III? If so, should the younger generation be worried how it'll affect them?
Those are great questions. When I talk about the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, it's just a generic term. I can police my vocabulary to people's preferences, but it's just the way that I talk, and people add meaning to it. What's happening right now is a war. This is a war that's a result of a long-running conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. When you hit on something that is actually quite worrying, and that is that we have a war in Europe going on at the same time. Russia invaded Ukraine twice. And then we have the war and the United States supports Ukraine in that war. And then as the war between Israel and Hamas and Israel and Hezbollah and Israel and the Houthis in Yemen and Israel and Iran proper has gone on, the Russians and the Iranians have gotten closer together. First, the Russians want Iran's drone technology to fire on Ukrainian cities, as well as its missiles. Iran has actually pretty large stocks of ballistic missiles. Of course, I never thought I would see the day, given Russia was at one time, this global power, that I would be relying on Iran, not a global power, for its military technology. But here's the thing, is that because the United States has been supporting Ukraine against Russia, the Russians have started supporting the Houthis in Yemen against shipping in the Red Sea. Now, the Red Sea, I wish I had a map here.
I wish I was saying the same thing.
And there's no actual map in my book, but the Red Sea is really, really important to the global economy. About 20% of trade goes through the Red Sea on the way to either Europe or the United States. Without the Red Sea, a lot of ships would have to go down and sail around Africa, which takes a lot more time, puts more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and it just takes more time. So, it is vital that the Iranians don't gain control through the Houthis, but here the Russians are, to get back at the United States, starting to arm the Houthis. Russian weaponry is starting to show up in the hands of Hezbollah. Because the United States supports Israel, and so you're starting to see very small, very discrete places where that conflict in Europe is starting to spill out into the conflict in the Middle East. And the worry that, it's not just me, but a lot of folks in Washington have, is that those conflicts become fused. Yeah. And that you start then having real problems. I mean, the Red Sea, and you buy a pair of Nikes, and they're made in Asia, and then they go up the Red Sea through the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean, and then all of a sudden you're going to start having Russian and American and all kinds of problems through these waterways and Europe and the Middle East all fusing together into a world. Now, I don't want to stress you all out. I have children just about your age, and they're stressed out too. I want to say that we have a long, long way to go until we get to World War III, and there are a lot of people who are working on trying to de-escalate these conflicts and bring peace to both areas. But there are risks out there in the world, and it is a very, very scary place to be right now. But again, we're not on the cusp of World War III, but you won't be surprised to learn that I've had that question at home myself.
Let's go to one of the questions online.
Yes, I have a question. There you go. We have a question from John from the webinar, and he says, prior to October 7th, it was rumored that in Israel and Saudi Arabia and other Arab nations, there's close to an alliance. Was October 7th an effort by Iran to break up this alliance, which it might have seen as an existential threat?
He's talking about the Abraham Accords.
Well, yeah, so there's really two things that are going on. In September 2020, there was a ceremony at the White House that the signing of something that became known as the Abraham Accords, which was the normalization of diplomatic relations between Israel and 4 Arab countries: United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. Of those 4, Sudan, the relations between Israel and Sudan never really progressed very far because Sudan fell into civil war less than a year after the Abraham Accords. But Israel and the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, and Bahrain have developed their relations, and there's economic relations, there's security relations. Even through this terrible conflict in the region, all of those countries have maintained their normal diplomatic relations with Israel. Though it's important to point out that the Bahrainis and the Moroccans do not have an ambassador in Israel right now, even though they did not break their relations with Israel. That's in addition to Israel's peace treaties with both Egypt, which were signed in 1979, and Jordan, which was signed in 1994. Now, it has been the policy of the U.S. government, both the Trump administration and the Biden administration, to quote-unquote expand the Abraham Accords. And when people talk about expanding the Abraham Accords, they're specifically talking about the normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. We have a diplomatic representative here from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia who may want to weigh in on this question, but let me talk about it. So the idea behind these relations, there's economic rationale for these relations. I think that the Emiratis, and the Bahrainis, and the Saudis all believe that Israel that's normalized into the relations is good, makes for a more prosperous, peaceful, stable region. But so there has been an interest in doing this, and it has been the policy of the U.S. government to push these relations. Part of this kind of connection between these two countries is between all these countries, particularly Israel and the United Arab Emirates, Israel and Bahrain, and Israel and Saudi Arabia, is all 4 of those countries are concerned about Iranian power in the region. They are countries who benefit from the current arrangements in the region. We call them status quo powers, and they're all worried about Iran, which is what they consider a revolutionary or revisionist power, which wants to remake the rules of the game in the region to Iran's advantage at the disadvantage of these other countries. And in the Israeli case, the Iranians have often said that they want to destroy Israel. There were talks that went on between the Biden administration and Saudi Arabia about normalization, but the idea was that we would wrap normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia around a security agreement between Saudi Arabia and the United States. That in exchange for the United States essentially saying we will defend Saudi Arabia, which was previously sort of an informal gentleman's handshake, we would now have an actual agreement that would say we will defend the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia against, an array of threats. And in exchange, the Saudis would agree to normalize their relations with Israel. Then, of course, the war happened. And the Saudis said, listen, normalization should not happen until there is a resolution to the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. And over the course of the conflict, the Saudis have been clearer and clearer and clearer about what that means, because every time a Saudi official says something about it, people say, oh, they don't really care about what the situation is in Gaza. And then, so the Saudis have said very clearly, most recently, the foreign minister has said there needs to be a Palestinian state before we can normalize our relations with Israel. That is the basics, the nuts and bolts. I can go into all kinds of complexities of it, but we can't be here till dinner time. And what I can say is that, yes, there was a confluence of interest about and concern about the Iranian challenge. And that has driven those countries, in addition to, as I said, economic interest. But while the Abraham Accords themselves remain robust and continue, the normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel remains very much on hold because of the conflict in the Gaza Strip.
You agree with that? Okay, good.
All right.
We have time for one last question. Rubina?
Yes, I'm Rubina. I'm a British American living in LA, writer. And it's been said that the historic rivalry between Britain and the US in the region helped shape the modern Middle East. And how is that relationship currently? Where are the two countries diverging? Where are they diverging? And what might happen after the elections? Will Trump or Harris? Is that going to make any difference?
So when you talk about the two countries, you're talking about the UK and the United States.
Yes.
Okay. By the way, it's all the UK's fault. None of this would be happening if not for the Brits. Let me start with the election. It's funny that was the last question. It's usually the first question people ask me is what's going to happen in the Middle East after the election. And so I have a somewhat non-obvious take on the Harris versus Trump in the Middle East. I don't really think it makes that much of a difference, to be completely honest with you. On the critical issues, they basically agree. They both support a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine. What that state looks like is they have different conceptions of it, but they both support a two-state solution. Despite President Trump's previous, kind of aggressive rhetoric towards Iran, he wants an agreement with the Iranians. That was his goal. He actually stole a page from President Obama's playbook, which was, President Obama didn't call it this, but maximum economic pressure on the Iranians that drew them to the negotiating table that led to the 2005 nuclear agreement between the United States, 5 countries, and Iran. President Trump basically wanted the same thing. Now, members of his administration wanted something different. I, at one point, counted 7 different Iran policies in the Trump administration, but President Trump wanted an agreement. He was not willing, at times when it would have been legitimate, to use military force against Iran. And I will, let me, if you may, I know we're running out of time, let me give you some examples. In the summer of 2019, the Iranians seized oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. They mined the Persian Gulf. The Persian Gulf being where large, very significant percentage of the world's oil supply goes through. They mined the Persian Gulf. They shot down an American surveillance drone operating in international airspace in the Persian Gulf. And in September 2019, attacked Saudi Arabia, attacked 2 oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, 2 of the biggest oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, taking 50% of Saudi supply off the market for a few days. Under those circumstances, based on American foreign policy, what had been declared American foreign policy since 1979, the United States would have been perfectly within its rights and legitimately used military force. And the president said, we're not going to do that. And it was the one moment of bipartisan consensus in Washington during the Trump administration. And Vice President Harris was the vice president of the administration that spent the first 2.5 years of the administration trying to loop the Iranians back into the nuclear agreement that President Trump broke, only to want to renegotiate another agreement. So I don't buy the idea that President Trump is so bellicose when it comes to Iran. On this question of normalization, They both see normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia as a strategic goal for the United States, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There isn't a lot of differences, probably a difference in tone. But I wrote a piece the other day for Foreign Policy Magazine saying 2/3 of Israelis would prefer President Trump to be the next president because they imagine that he's going to be uniquely tough with the Iranians. Meanwhile, he told Netanyahu, finish your war. I don't want you to have wars while I'm the president of the United States. Harris obviously has called for ceasefires, and her administration is the current administration is looking for negotiated agreements in Lebanon. So it's really, really not that different. In terms of the U.S. and the U.K., basically we inherited the British Empire in the Middle East. In 1968 or 69, the British Prime Minister said, we're withdrawing from the Middle East east of the Suez Canal, meaning the Persian Gulf region, because Britain was exhausted and broke and could not maintain its empire any longer. It was the British Navy that had patrolled these waters and ensured the free flow of energy resources out of the Middle East and helped to ensure stability in the region. They withdrew in 1971, and basically the United States took over the job, and that's where we've been ever since. Of course, there's once again nuances and complexities and important pieces of the story that I'm leaving out, but we all have other places and other things to do today. So, but that's basically the story. The current relationship between the UK and I'm not a European analyst, but I'll just say that Great Britain is a very junior partner to the United States, and the current government basically is really nowhere to be found on the Middle East, other than announcing not long ago the embargo of some insignificant amount of components for weapons for the Israel Defense Forces. That's it.
Yes. Well, I have to say this has been a fascinating conversation. I hope you all appreciate, I know just getting a little background on the Middle East for our high school students here. And I want to thank you all, first off, not only for being here, especially for being here on a day as difficult as today to get through Los Angeles.
Difficult for me emotionally.
Difficult for any Yankee fan emotionally. With the parade outside, it's quieted down now. For our friends and viewers online, you have no idea how noisy and loud and difficult it was just moving around this area. So we're especially grateful to everyone that was able to actually make it today. And thank you for your questions. And we are also especially grateful to all of you online. This was our test today. If you have any comments, things that would make it better, please let us know, because we want to do this more often. You may not be aware that for our online audience is all over the country. When we do these, we have people on the East Coast, literally all over the country, sometimes out of the country on these webinars. So we are delighted to have all of you there. We'll continue to do this as we now have some equipment to do it. But this has been a fabulous conversation. I want to thank all of you that were participating in this, particularly to ask questions. I want to thank our staff and our volunteers for all you did to make this possible. And most of all, I want to thank Stephen Cook. And in a way to just make this a little more tangible, I want to give you a little a book. This is about a book on Los Angeles. I hope this doesn't.
Despite the outcome of the World Series, I'm an East Coaster. I'm a native New Yorker who actually really enjoys coming to Los Angeles. I think it's a wonderful city. It's a lot of fun. I have great friends here, and I just want to thank you all, both the virtual audience and all you high school students here who had just terrific questions and paid attention. I know it was hard because there was a parade 50 feet away from us. So thank you all very, very much, and thank you to the World Affairs Council of Los Angeles for the book and for setting this whole thing up. I appreciate it.
Will you please join me in a big round of applause for Stephen Cook? We look forward, by the way, we have some great events coming up on the 15th. High school. I hope some of you guys are going. We have a high school event on elections with misinformation, fraud. Should be really interesting. Of course, it's going to be after the election, so we'll know the outcome, and we can talk a little bit about that. On the 19th, we have Dan Schnorr, but for our webinar audience, we have him talking about the elections on the 12th. On the 19th, we have Dan again with, this will be with the Mexican ambassador to the United States, on talking again about the results of the elections and the impact on Mexico. And we have some other great events coming up with a holiday party in December. So I hope you'll join us, and we look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you again for being here today and putting up with all the circus outside. It's been great having you here. Everybody have a great day. Thank you so much.